and chapter 2. Now, no need of us going back over the things we've been going over each time, because everybody got that right. We've all got it down in our mind now about what happened with Paul and what kind of a church this was, and how it was a good congregation, good church, and Paul was worried, and he was praying for them, and he exhorted them. And so he still does that in chapter 1, as we read last week in the 2nd Thessalonian letter. Prayed for them, bragged on them, and he added one thing in the second letter, chapter 1, they didn't put in the first letter. And that is, he talked about condemnation. But he talked about condemnation as a way of comfort and consolation. And he says, now, you are suffering all this affliction, but rest with us. In other words, put up with it, because the day's coming, what will happen to those who afflict you now? They will be afflicted, see? They're going to be afflicted because it is a righteous thing with God. It's a righteous thing with God to recompense. So you just keep that in mind when you say it's not fair. What they're doing to us is not fair. That's true. Something ought to be done. That's true. And God promises, I will do it. So when you have to suffer for Christ, well, just remember that. Remember that the day's coming when your afflictor will have to answer for that. And your afflictor will be given the just punishment. Not too much. What will I do if you afflict me? And then I decide I'm going to straighten it out, see? I'll give you a double dose. You see in there? I'll go too far, but God will see that it's done in the right way. Now then, chapter 1, again, is bragging on them, giving them comfort, building them up, stay firm, and even though you have to suffer, just remember God's watching, and God will afflict those who afflict you. Now, let's straighten out a problem. That's chapter 2. Chapter 2 is the problem we're going to be dealing with tonight, and as we turn to that, here we find it is the coming of Christ. It'll be the second coming, what we'd say the second coming. It's going to be the next coming of Christ. Now, in chapter 1, they had a problem with the coming of Christ, but it's a different one than this. What was it in chapter 1? What was the problem? Yeah, you have to be alive when Christ comes, or you've lost your hope. And so he straightened that out. No, it doesn't make any difference. So he sends that letter back, letting them know whether you're dead or alive, doesn't make any difference. We're all on the same even keel. Now then, somehow they got the idea that Christ was coming just any day. And so Paul now is going to straighten that out, that Christ is not coming just any day. So last week we looked and we saw that he says, don't you let your mind be troubled or shaken, as that the day of the Lord is just at hand by Spirit. In other words, if somebody comes along and says, I'm an inspired man and the Lord's coming in 3 weeks, don't you believe him? Then he says also down here, by word, if some preacher or teacher teaches it, says, I heard Peter say it over here, and so don't believe it. And then he says, by epistle as from us. Even if you get an epistle that has my name signed to it, and it says the Lord is coming just any time, don't you believe it? So we spent time talking about that, and we're not going to go back over it. Now then, what he says is, it will not be except. Now what is it? It will not be refers to what? The coming of the Lord. So the Lord will not come except. Now there's a certain thing that's going to happen. The apostasy. Now tonight, we're going to spend our whole class period talking about the apostasy. The apostasy comes first. Now, the word apostasy literally means a falling away. That is what it means, really, a falling away. As you look up there, the word apo, A-P-O, the part of it there, that's our word for from, departing. In other words, after class, I'm going to apo the building. And so that's how that word is used. depart, go from, apo. Now the last part, Stacy, is from a verb that means stand. You stand. Okay, now, if God tells me to stand right here, tells Mike, you stand up there below. Now here's where you guys are supposed to stand. Anybody that wants to be pleasing to God, stand right here. I take my stand. Mike takes his stand. We're standing where God wants us to stand. And then I apo. What do? I step aside. See? I depart. I go straight. And so then you could say Lowell has apo Stacy. See? The apostasy there. He's gone aside from where he should be standing. So that's what apostasy means. Now the apostasy is going to come first. Now I want you to note there's going to be three things that have to take place before the Lord comes back again. Let's note what these three things are. First of all, the Lord's not coming in the next 2 or 3 weeks because the apostasy has to come first. Now, how long does it take an apostasy of the church to happen? It takes a little while, doesn't it? See, it takes a little while. I don't know how long it takes, but it just doesn't happen. I mean, you're not just faithfully serving the Lord, and then just all of a sudden you just turn like this. If I get up and I announce Sunday, I'm leaving. I'm leaving here. I'll never be back in this building again. I'm renouncing this. Well, it's a shock to you. I just do it Sunday. It's the first time you've heard. But what do you know about me? What do you know about me in the last 6 months or 6 years? I've been having a problem up here. I've been going that way. I've been hiding it from you. And now then, I'm just leaving. It's kind of like I'm standing here. Mike and I are standing here. Now, God says stand here. Okay, I'm staying here. Now, before I step down, what am I going to be doing? I don't want to stand here. Yeah. If I stand here, I won't have any fun. I want to go over there where these other people are. That's where I'll have some fun. So I'm going to be working on this thing, right? And so when you see me leave, you know I was doing something when I was here. Okay, now, that's what he's saying. There's going to be an apostasy. So that's going to take a little while, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then another thing, there will be the removal of the hindering power. Now, Paul is going to say there is a power right now that is keeping the church from the apostasy. And that power, whatever it is, has to be taken out of the way. It has to go. It has to be taken out of the way. Kind of like we're in right now with the Al-Qaeda. Before terrorism is taken out of the way, why, we've got to get rid of bin Laden. So there's somebody there that is hindering us. And then there's going to be the revealing of the lawless one. So now the lawless, or the person that works outside the law of God, he's going to be made known. And all this is going to happen before the Lord comes back again. So that's what he's telling them. See, you can be assured the Lord isn't coming just any day, because these three things have to take place. So now let's read this. It says here, verse 3, let no man beguile you in any wise, for it will not be, second coming, except the falling away come first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. And then you'd have to skip down to verse 7, where it says, for the mystery of lawlessness doth already work, only there is one that restraineth now until he be taken out of the way. Now, at this time, there was the mystery of lawlessness, the attitude, the disposition of being disobedient to God. It was already at work, but it couldn't produce fruit. It couldn't go all the way until we get rid of this person out there that's hindering it. So it's kind of like I'm standing here, and the mystery of lawlessness is already working in me, God said stay here, but I want to leave. I want to go out there where there's fun. But suppose we've got some great big guy standing over here with a ball bat. And he says, Lowell, if you step down off that platform, I'm going to work you over with this ball bat. Well, I'll stay here, right? So I'm going to stay here. How long will I stay here? Until somebody gets rid of him, until he gets going. But I'm standing up here, and what is going on through my mind? I haven't stepped down yet, but what kind of person am I? I'm making my plans. The desire's there. It's working. Lawlessness is working. And the only reason I'm not leaving is because of that guy that's hindering me. So, he said, that's the way it is with the church. He said, right now, there is a spirit of lawlessness in the church. Well, that's shocking. That is really shocking. What year is it? 52 A.D. How many years after the establishment of the church? It was established in 33 A.D. I don't want you to come down with any 19 because I can't add like that. Just round it off. See? So 20 years, you see, we've had here. And the mystery of lawlessness is already there. Can you believe that? Well, let me ask you. Let's just take you. Let's take people you know. You know anybody that has gone astray in over a 20-year period of time? 20 years ago, they were faithful and a giant in the faith, and you had every confidence in the world, and in the last 20 years, they've gone from here to here. Well, we all know many people who've done that. Well, back in this time, this was already happening again. See, it's happening with these people there. So he said, now, the reason he's giving this is Christ isn't going to come until all of this takes place that's in there. Now, let's look at it here. The one church following the one Bible should continue until the end of time. But there was an apostasy. And in the apostasy, the way that it happened was this church was headed on down. It was supposed to do this, go all the way down, but there's going to be apostasy. It's not going to work that way. Now, the Lord right here said about the kingdom. What's the difference in the kingdom and the church? It's the same. All right, and in the days of these kings, the Romans, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It shall stand forever. So it's going to be there. Jesus said in Matthew 16:18 that upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. So now, the church or the kingdom is not going to be destroyed. But there is going to be an apostasy. You see that goes out there. There's going to be an apostasy in there. Now, there shouldn't be. It should just go right on down the line that's in here. Let's suppose that we have an apostasy here in Monroe. And let's say everybody here except Mike and I apostatize, goes astray. What will happen as far as outside people looking? 20 years from now they look. Who's going to get the building, by the way? You guys are going to get it, aren't you? I mean, you go to some wild-eyed idea, and so Mike and I are going to be kicked out. And where are we going to go? Oh, we'll go up there somewhere in my house and worship, and Helen will kick us out of there because she's going with you. And so where's the church? People talk about the church in Monroe. What are they going to say? Oh, the church in Monroe meets out in the back corner of Lowell's house. No, the church in Monroe's up here. The apostasy is going to get the attention. See, apostasy is going to get the attention. People say, well, is there a church left in Monroe? Nope. Nope, church apostatized. Well, there is church. Oh, by the way, then Mike apostatizes, and that just leaves me. You ever notice how I'm always a good guy, Mike? Now, that just leaves me. So there I sat. I'm the only one. Somebody asked, where's the church in Monroe? What are you going to say? But now, is there a church in Monroe under these circumstances? See, as long as I'm here, As long as I'm faithful, everybody else is apostatized. Yeah, still church. I'm Christian. Not enough for you to see, but still here. Now, I'm just trying to draw this picture because that's kind of what happened. Kind of what happened. There was such a big apostasy that it's hard to find a Christian that was left out of the thing. Now, that's the way it's supposed to be. But now, history records this is literally what happened. And that is that the church goes down until 120 A.D. In 120 A.D., it makes a turn and it starts off. Instead of going straight on, it goes off. Now, is that an apostasy? In other words, as we draw the picture, that's an apostasy. You see, as you get down there. All right, now, that 120 A.D., we'll come back to it again, but we can actually put a figure on that. Now then, we're going to see here in this the man of sin. So let's go back and let's look at it here now. It says, the falling away come first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, he that exalteth himself against all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sitteth in the temple of God, setting himself forth as God. Now, we have this man of sin. Man of sin. Pretty bad description, isn't it, when you talk about a man of sin? See? What would you say, man of muscle? See? Or a man of speed? Or a man of intelligence? It's a qualifying factor, telling you what it is. The man of sin. Now up there, I put the Antichrist up there. And under that, I put, this is not him. Well, if it's not him, why did I put it up there? Well, here's the reason I put it up there. About 10 people out of 10 will tell you this is talking about the man of talking about the Antichrist. That what it is, it's saying now the Antichrist is going to raise up, the Antichrist is going to be revealed, and so this is talking about the Antichrist. And then you start reading your commentaries, and even McGarvey says this. He's an excellent commentator, but I disagree with him on this, and I'll show you why. But you get it here, and as you get denominationalism, why, they have a whole lot of things built around the Antichrist. And why is the Antichrist such a big deal in denominationalism? It's because of premillennialism. Remember other lessons we've had? And in premillennialism, then this Antichrist is supposed to rise up and do this and that and so forth. Well, I'm just telling you this man of sin that is going to be revealed is not the Antichrist. Let's look right here. Little children, it is the last hour. And as ye heard that Antichrist cometh, even now have there arisen many Antichrists, whereby we know it's the last hour. Who is the liar? But he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ, this is the Antichrist, he that denieth the Father and the Son. Now, we pretty well described the Antichrist there, haven't we? John's saying about it. By the way, we always talk about the Antichrist. How many Antichrists does this say? There are many. There's not the Antichrist that you hear about all the time. There are many Antichrists. And any person that rose up and said that Jesus was not the Christ, and so on, he was the Antichrist. Now, they had a doctrine that rose up back there, and I'm not going to spend any time on it tonight, where they, that in the church it came out, they would say that flesh is evil. All things physical is evil, and all things spiritual is good. So when Jesus came, he came in the flesh. Therefore, he had some evil about him. But when the Christ came, that was spiritual. And so when Jesus died, then they'd get it all in there that he would die and do away with his body, and then he would go back as the Christ. In other words, then he could be the Christ. But while he was in his body, he couldn't be the Christ because flesh is sin and spirit is good. So you see, there's a difference in Jesus and the Christ. They are the same, but there's a difference, you see? Well, that's the way this doctrine was was all built, you see, in there. He's saying anybody that says that is the Antichrist. They're opposed to Christ. Then again, for many deceivers are going out into the world, even they that confess not that Jesus cometh in the that Jesus Christ cometh in the flesh. Now they would say Jesus came in the flesh, but if you don't say Jesus Christ came in the flesh, you're the Antichrist, you see. So, this guy is not the Antichrist. This is something else that we've got here. Okay, now then, let's look about this man of sin. Let's see how he's described. He's described as the son of perdition. The word perdition means destruction. John the Baptist one time called these Pharisees, you offsprings or son of snakes. What does that mean? A son of snakes. We're called sons of light, sons of darkness, sons of, what does that describe? The characteristics. Whatever you're a son of, you have the characteristics of it. You're a son of a snake, you're a snake. Now, if you're a son of perdition or destruction, that's what's going to happen to you. You are destruction. Yeah, you're going to be destroyed. Everything about you is going to be destroyed. Whatever you accomplish is going to be destroyed. Your life is just built on destruction. Now, this guy is going to oppose and exalt himself against all that is called God or that is worshipped, Paul said. He's going to set in the temple of God. Now, what is the temple of God? It's a church. So he's going to set in the church of God, and he's going to set himself forth as God. So that's what he's going to do. Now, here we have a problem. We say, who's this talking about? I don't know. And yet I'm going to give you an argument to tell you I think I know. But the Scripture doesn't say. Paul said all these things, and then Paul didn't say, here's who I'm talking about. But the Thessalonians knew who he was talking about. Do you know how they knew? Look in verse 5, the very next verse. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things? So, when I was up there with you, I told you these things. I told you who this guy was. See, so you've already been told. So now, all he has to do is just describe him. And he said, now you've been told. You see who it is. So they had an advantage that we don't have. And you say, well, does that give them an advantage of salvation? Well, they had an advantage that we don't have, but the only advantage that they had was that he was telling them Christ isn't coming just any day. See? And remember, I told you about these things happening. Now, you and I have an advantage because we've already seen them happen. See? And so we'll put that in its context there. So he said, now, I told you these things. Now ye know that which restraineth, or he that restraineth, to the end that he may be revealed in his own season. Now, whoever this guy is that we're talking about over here, the son of perdition, this man of sin, there is somebody that is restraining him now. Yeah. No. There's somebody that's holding back. Just like this big guy outside the door. I would leave if it wasn't for that guy outside the door, but he's 6'6" with a ball bat and a shotgun. I know who he is. You don't know who he is. But he's restraining me. Well, you know enough, don't you? In other words, I don't have to tell you what his name is, named John Brown or something. You've got the picture, you see, when I would say that. So there's somebody restraining now, and this guy who's restraining has to be taken out of the way so this man of sin can be revealed. Then he'll be revealed. 8. And then shall be revealed the lawless one, whom the Lord Jesus shall slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to naught the manifestation of his coming. Even he who's coming and so forth. We'll get back to that. So once he's going to be known, then the Lord's going to come and slay him with his breath. I take that to be that he's going to be here until the Lord comes back. And when the Lord comes back, the Lord then will do away with this guy. Now you say, well, you've been talking about it enough. Who is it? Now, everybody get the picture so far? In other words, Paul didn't say who it was. And there are people that say, well, they think it's talking about somebody back there, some insignificant person, and so forth that was back in there. But this is a big guy. This is a big deal, see, is a point here. Paul talks about him, and then he doesn't tell us, but he said, I've told you guys about this thing. And so we have to study and kind of put it together and see, well, what could we find out? So as we look at it, I think that we can see that all of these things, every one of them, is fulfilled in the Pope. And we'll see every one of them is exactly the way that Paul talked about it there. Now, there was one that restrained him, the Pope, from developing, even though the mystery of lawlessness was already working in 52 A.D. There was already that disposition, that attitude. There was the people that wanted to apostatize in 52 A.D., but there was somebody restraining them, and I would understand that to mean the Caesar. Now you say, well, why would the Caesar be restraining? All right, let's suppose that anybody in the church at that time had the audacity to stand up and say, I am the head of the church, I am the head of government, I am the head of all things on this earth. What would Caesar have done? He wouldn't have lasted very long. They couldn't do it while Caesar was there because Caesar claimed to be divine. He said, I am divine. And it better not be somebody else that starts to raise his head, or the Caesar is going to do away with it. Now we know this, historically speaking, so far. Now, history shows that these things did happen. I'm going to give you some things that McGarvey says in page 42 of his book in there. He said, now here's some things we know that did happen. The Catholic Church has one official man at its head, and the arrogancy of its claims are centered in him. So there is a man, we know, that came out of it. That man came with and out of an apostasy of the New Testament church, and we'll see that. The Pope did appear after the destruction of Rome. After the Caesars were done away, then the Pope made his appearance. Now, the Pope has exalted himself against God in Christ, calling himself the vicar or infallible substitute for Christ, and encouraging his followers to speak of him thus, saying, Our Lord God the Pope, another God on earth, doeth whatsoever he listeth, even things unlawful, and is more than God. Well, that's what the Catholic doctrine has said. Now, you shake your head and say, my, well, it's like anything. Once you get to studying and you get into the thing and you see it, it's just one thing after another. And so the Pope claims to be the vicar of Christ. He's taking the place of Christ. And so if you come to him, whatever he says is law, and it's going to happen that way. See? He can command whatever he wants to be. Now he sits in the temple of God, setting himself forth as God. So he's setting up down the church in there. That's where he put himself, up there. And then the last thing that we haven't read, he proves his supreme claims by fraudulent miracles. Let's look at this guy right here now, back to verse 9. It says, Even he whose coming is according to the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders. Now, we'll talk about those things, but this is how he does it that is in there. And then another passage that I want you to look at is in 1 Timothy 4:1. Paul also talks about an apostasy. He said, But the Spirit saith expressly that in latter times some shall fall away from the faith. There's your apostasy. How's it going to happen? Giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of demons. That's where they get their doctrine. You're not going to get them out of the Bible, out of the Word of God, coming from the devil. Through the hypocrisy of men that speak lies. It's going to be done by hypocritical men who are speaking lies, branded in their own consciousness with a hot iron. It'll not cause them to have any conscious problems whatsoever, just like a cow that's been branded. Now look at the two things that Paul said you can identify them by. Forbidding to marry. Is there forbidding to marry in the Catholic Church? Yeah. And commanding to abstain from meats. Was that in the Catholic Church? And why do you have fish on Friday? Do I know why you always have fish on Friday? You know why you have to have clam chowder? Because of the Catholic doctrine. They've now changed this thing the last few years in here so that you can eat some meat, but it carries over. It's still so strong that it still carries over with it that you couldn't eat meat on Friday. You could eat fish, but you couldn't eat meat. And so that's the reason that you have clam chowder every time that you go to a restaurant on Friday. Well, Paul elsewhere tells about this apostasy, and he said, now there's two more things that you can identify. Well, you look at all of these things, and the Catholic Church fulfills all of them. Fulfills all of them. Let's look at it like this. Here it is, we have this lesson from history. We have Pentecost over here, 33 A.D., and then Paul writes in 52 A.D. Now the mystery of lawlessness is already working. The attitude, the disposition is already working. By 120 A.D., the organizational change was taking place. Rome ceased to exist in 350, and the Pope was exalted in 606. So in this period of time, 500-year period of time, this mystery of lawlessness working and developed into the Pope, which is a full-blown apostasy. That's what I'd see that it is. Now, we can look at it like this. As we look at the man of sin and put it in perspective here, let's go back to this verse I mentioned a minute ago. Even he who's coming is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders. Now, any commentary will tell you that that means lying signs, lying powers, lying wonders. In other words, lying describes all three of them. Now, has the Catholic Church, do they ever claim any powers, miracles that's a lie? Any statues ever cry? Any pictures on windows ever pop up in places once a year to keep everybody going over? See? And claiming to find bones and having miraculous powers and all of this. So they're coming with all of these lying miracles. And he said, with all deceit of unrighteousness for them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth that they might be saved. Now here, if a person doesn't have the love of the truth, they're going to go along with these miracles. You see these false miracles happen, and unless you have a real love of the truth and put them to test, you'll say, well, yeah, it is, and so you go ahead and you believe that doctrine. So a person has to really love the truth, or these deceitful people that claim to do these lying miracles will be able to lead you astray. For this cause God sendeth them a working of error, that they should believe a lie. God permits these lying wonders and lying miracles to happen. So I kind of put it here. You see these lying miracles on a TV set. Does God permit that? Yeah. God permits it. It's all fakery. No truth in it. Yet people are looking at it every day. Why does God permit that? These poor, innocent people carried astray. What does this say? If you don't have a love of the truth. That's key. You've got to have a love of the truth, or false doctrine will lead you astray. Don't ever think that false doctrine is not powerful. How powerful is a counterfeit $10 bill? Could you be deceived by a $10 bill? Sure could, couldn't you? What do you have to do to make sure that you never, ever pass a $10 bill? That you don't ever receive and pass a $10 bill? I bet every one of us in here has taken a counterfeit $10 bill and spent it. What would you have to do? You'd have to have a love for that money, wouldn't you? You'd have to have a love. You'd have to make sure, I'm not going to take any counterfeits. How would you make sure that you're not going to take any counterfeits? You're going to put them to the test. Every time somebody gives you a $10 bill, hold that thing up, you're going to look at it, you're going to examine it. And because that's your life. That's your whole life. That's the way it should be in religious matters. It's our whole life. We need to examine things. Is it the truth, you see, that we have in here? Now, there's several passages of scriptures that we can go to. Deuteronomy 13:1, I got to go real fast here. In false gods coming, Matthew 24:24, Jesus said there's going to be false Christ that comes. But when they come and say, behold, here he is, don't believe him. Christ said, because that's not going to be me, but there's going to be false Christ. What about Acts 8? Simon, what was he doing to the people? He was leading them astray, and they were calling him the Great One. Exodus 7, when Moses went into Pharaoh, who did he have surrounding him that caused the Pharaoh to believe that they had those divine beings, see? Those magicians. 2 Corinthians 11:13, what does Paul say about these apostles there? They're false apostles, you see. Deceitful workers. And so this man of sin is going to build this religion based upon this. Now, history does record this, that in 120 A.D., this is the first time that you find in secular history where the church started elevating one man in the eldership above the other elders. So if you got 6 elders, take one, lift him up, and then call him a bishop. They're all bishops, aren't they? See, all the elders are bishops, but call him up, and then call him a bishop, and the rest of them elders. And so the church took off. It was in that organizational way. And you go down, and by 606, this thing had worked in to where one of these guys had worked himself up to be the head of the whole church that was in there. Now, God knew this would happen. And God told us it would happen in 2 Thessalonians 2, one we're in. He said, it'll not come except the falling away be come first. Now, remember, it says that he'll set in the temple of God. There'll be somebody sitting in the temple of God. So point that over to the Pope right there. That's what he's doing. In 1 Timothy 4, it says, going to depart from the faith. And it mentions in there, forbidding to marry. That's what the Pope's done. Commanding to abstain from foods. That's what the Pope's done. All of this points down to it. Now, let's come back again. If this passage is not talking about the Pope and the Catholic Church, and I cannot say it is because Paul didn't say it was, but if it's not, it fits the Catholic Church like a glove on a hand, doesn't it? Everything about it fits it. And if it is somebody else and they were wrong, here's the Catholic Church doing the same thing. What does that mean about them? They're still wrong, so it would be there. Now, as you look at the church, you find from 33 to 120 A.D., you have the New Testament church. And then from 120 to 606, you have the development of the apostasy in the Roman Catholic Church. And then the Lord's church just fell away a step at a time, took those hundreds of years. How did it do it? How did it do it? All right, for our last chart, it did it in organization. The church has always had its apostasies in organization. It's had 3 major apostasies, all been in organization. Now down here in New Testament times, we have congregations. And then out of the congregations, there are elders that arise. So we appoint elders. Now that's a New Testament plan. But in 120 A.D., that's when we find where they started calling one of those elders, lifting him up, and saying, now, he is the bishop. And so he was the head of the elders. He's the president, the head elder of that. So that's when it started, as far as we can know, in secular history. Then you take these guys, and they meet together, your bishops, meet together in bishops' meetings, and when they meet together, then they decide, well, we'll select one of us to go on up and meet with the others. It finally ended up in the church where there were 5 of those guys. The chart doesn't give us room in here for 5. There were 5 of them from different major churches. Jerusalem, Constantinople, Antioch, Rome, I forget the others, but they 3, Alexandria, and there were 5 guys. And these 5 guys were all elders in some church in Jerusalem or somewhere that had been elevated to the bishop, which had been elevated to another slot. And so they were up there, and then they began vying, well, we need one man over this board of bishops. And so after going back and forth, finally, there was one man that arose, and he's the elder out of Rome, and there you have the Pope, the full-grown church. So you have the apostasy, as Paul describes it right in here, you see, in all of this. So let me reiterate really fast. So as we look here, we have the Pope described. Verse 6, somebody restraining the Caesars is what it must be. It could even have been Paul himself holding the churches down. I thought maybe, well, that's who it is. But it's probably either Paul himself so that the churches can't do this, can't get astray, or the Caesars, but probably the Caesars. For the mystery of lawlessness was already working at that time. This apostasy was being developed. Then the lawless one was revealed. The Pope finally was revealed. The Lord's going to come and slay him with his breath. I understand that to mean the Catholic Church will exist till the end of time. The Lord's going to come back and do that. And then the way that they get their power is in all lying miracles that they do. It's in deceit of unrighteousness. And people who do not love the truth will be led astray with this. It's a way of separating the sheep from the goats, I guess. So there's that love of the truth in there. And for they might be judged who believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. So, what we have, second coming of Christ, but he describes why Christ will not be coming real quickly is because the apostasy has to take place. Then he describes the apostasy. See? So, when you say, well, why is he describing the apostasy? It's because of the second coming of Christ. Are there any questions?